So everybody, my name's Chris. I've been a sim fellow for 2 years at a small DGH in the northeast of England, and I've now moved on to my acute medicine training. After about a year in post, I'd kind of thought I was getting a bit confident with my debriefing technique, but started to notice, as in the cartoon here, I was getting a lot of stock phrases and kind of knee-jerk reactions from participants at the start, and it was starting to get a bit frustrating. So I wanted to try something a bit different and a bit new. Don't worry, no learners were harmed in the making of this project. So I had a good look and I thought, what does a normal debrief look like? And from what I could understand, this picture kind of summarises it quite well, with the debriefer standing at the front, trying to help coordinate all of the participants, making sure that they're having a lovely conversation, it's all safe. But that's really hard. There's actually a lot of responsibility on the debriefer. You've got to make sure it's safe, everybody gets on, that there's no beef or kind of conflicts beforehand. Everybody's on the same page, we're all learning the same thing, and everybody's actively participating. And it was getting harder and harder. I was just realizing this is what a lot of the societies say, and even a lot of the debrief assessment tools, this is the OSAD as an example, really put a lot of onus on the debriefer to make sure that the learners learn something. But how am I going to ever guarantee that a learner is learning something? And a lot of it comes down to ensuring that there's a lot of reflection going on. And again, it's highlighted quite strongly here. But the more I thought about it and tried to make sure that learning which is messy, personal, and specific to each individual learner was something perhaps not necessarily achievable by one person alone. And certainly with groups of 2, 3, 4 people, that was maybe something more realistic, but getting to bigger groups of 8, 16, how was I ever going to correlate so many people's essential learning in one place? So that's where I went a bit off-piste. So in terms of kind of a good reflective cycle, you have your simulation experience, you go off and start your debrief, get people's ideas, thoughts about what's going on, and this is where a lot of the debrief tools come in, and they tell you how to guide through it and go through it, but it actually doesn't give you any idea about the experience of coordinating a debrief. And then you go on and hopefully try to close the loop and ensure that people go on and learn things and apply it in practice. But I read a paper by Humphreys 2009 called By the Light of the Tau, and it really helped me understand the challenges of ensuring good reflective practice in learners. And the first thing I was stuck with, and I think a lot of people may agree, is just common sense. I was lacking it. You know what you know what you don't know sometimes, but not knowing what you don't know is the challenge. And this is the premise of a good debrief, I guess, is that you get a vast array of experiences in the same room, and so long as people are actively sharing those ideas, not sitting in the corner keeping their epiphany to themselves, we should hopefully come to a group collective idea about what was the point of the session. But albeit that's really good, it comes back to this lack of discipline, and actually it's quite hard to change. And kind of come to the final point is, even if we do identify some good learning, is anybody going to go and change practice? We want to go through the path of least resistance, the easiest kind of route in terms of applying things. So I wanted to look at something that might help fix some of that. So this is where I came onto my own little reflective cycle. There's lots of different ways of debriefing. So I was having a little read through the literature, and I realised that my preference was just to make a quick summary of things and crack on, rather than perhaps the preferred method within debriefing of taking the time and reflecting on action. And there's lots of different premises and there's lots of different educational theories about good reflection, but I wanted something that would continue to build and add to previous experiences so that learners must complete that cycle, and that's what I was trying to do within my debrief, albeit keeping a fair balance of things as the way. And actually that role of a debriefer is quite important to help people get through. And as I said already, I was just very worried about the people who were sat in silence in the corner of the room. Were they just being very introverted, not prepared? Had I not done the debrief quite well enough? Were the type A kind of more extrovert personalities dominating the debrief and causing conflict and challenge and where things to go? So how was I ever going to align everybody's thoughts and agendas in one place, let alone my own, with the learners? And that's where nominal group technique came in. So I was doing my PG dip in MedEd last year, and somebody put this forward to me, and it comes from the business world. And essentially you get a group of individuals sat in silence for the first 5 to 10 minutes, and they just brainstorm. They write down all their ideas about a project, And then they come together in a round-robin fashion, share the ideas, one person at a time, one item at a time, so that all of the potential ideas, brainstorm thoughts, are put out in a fair and effective manner. And then again, ideally in silence again, they rank them, and then the ranked items are then put back and forward, and the most popular items are discussed first, and the least things are left at the bottom. And in terms of translating this to something I could use in the debrief, I tried to create something that was quite user-friendly and essentially just use the plus delta model for learners, because it wasn't quite fair to inflict upon them the challenges of learning all the different debrief tools. And essentially, the points 1 through 5 at the bottom were to essentially capture their prioritized take-home messages at the end. And this fits in quite nicely. So you have your simulation experiences before, you start your debrief, and right at that start, get everybody to sit down and start and write things. So that gets everybody a bit anxious in terms of where's the fizz pop, where's the energy. Well, I made sure it was only 2 to 5 minutes, and I cut them off before that so that we could start and crack and keep some of the flow going in the discussion. And essentially this was really helpful to help understand what the learners wanted to prioritize. I wasn't putting on my preferences, I was giving them control of the debrief, and hopefully linking that in with the take-home messages. And this was quite interesting that I could compare what I'd intended to deliver to what the learners were trying to take away. And similarly, during the debrief, I could see what their agenda was in terms of that, and add in any of my own if they wished or thought it was useful. And to kind of take things away, I wanted to see what their thoughts of about the process and just any kind of other feedback about what was going on. So I had a lot of F1s and F2s at my disposal, and we did 2 sessions in each group, and essentially I ran that numerous times. From each scenario, I got a chance to do a nominal group debrief, and essentially collected that for each visit of them. And I got 62 participants and 58 pieces of paper back, so that was quite useful. And this is all their own writing, their own thoughts, and it was there ready and available. I didn't have to break away, do any focus groups, I had it to hand. I also collected on flip charts their ranked discussion points, so I had the debriefs from every single session to hand already available. I kept a little personal reflective log because this was scary, this was different, and as I say, I got the feedback at the end through various digital platforms. Just a brief sharing about my reflections. It was a little bit of a roller coaster because this is against everything I'd been taught up to this point, and it was very scary. And by the end of the first day, I thought, no, this isn't it. It's not worth doing. But I had, second day, give it a go, stuck with it, and actually, it started to make sense. All that stuff that I'd been planning and anticipating was going okay. And ultimately, it was a drop in the water. The guys didn't really even notice it. And just for anybody who does wish to try and take this forward, this is the well-known Dunning-Kruger effect of content expertise. So just give it time. In terms of some feedback from the learners, so this is about 27 points of individual feedback. Most common thing was that people actually found it okay. Not everything was perfect, but they were giving me what I wanted to hear, and this was with no guidance, prompts, backhand deals. They were willingly telling me these things, that they found it useful. So what did I get? So this is just a very brief kind of summary of some of the key points, and to make it a little bit clearer, I've added colour. And kind of very interesting to me, these are things that I had no idea, because I was in a small DGH, there wasn't really anybody to feed back for me about how my debriefs have been going. And kind of on the positive side of things, you can see actually the top things we were talking about essentially matched. The only things that didn't were the fact I was maybe just happy they'd done the simulation correctly and they'd completed it okay. But actually maybe we were talking about their teamwork and their leadership. Interestingly, we don't match on the challenging side of things, and this was something that I was aware of, that we've been talking actually, the things they found hardest were just the fact it's a simulation. They're not used to the environment. It's taking up a lot of their brain power just to actively engage in it. Albeit we did match on a few things. And this just gave me the lovely insight that actually we should give our participants more credit. They can actually debrief themselves to a degree. They do it out in the real world. Why do we have to take that power away from them in a debrief? But actually I think it came to a point earlier on about good mentorship in reflection, is that as the debrief lead you can highlight things that they maybe aren't always comfortable at, and some of the things that we had praised earlier on also came up in the negative, so it is useful, and it comes down to that known unknowns and unknown unknowns concept. In terms of the take-home messages and my learning objectives, sorry there's a lot on there, But this is the amalgamation of all of those different sessions across 2 rounds of simulation. And to make it a bit easier, added a bit of colour. Now, just to say, the clinical management side of things vastly outweighed the points that were taken home. And it was roughly 120 points of discussions commented on about the take-home messages about managing sepsis, AKI, etc. But this is kind of just a brief summary of where things were going, and overall there was some quite nice matching of discussion points. But interestingly, what I hadn't realised I was doing, and this is where this technique comes in useful, it was telling me that I was telling them more about using protocols and guidelines, and I hadn't realised I'd been doing it, but actually quite an important objective. And the same with planning roles and responsibilities before going into the simulation. These are just some interesting insights that I hadn't realised would come out of this. Again, what did the learners think about it? How did they find it? Generally, it was a positive experience. It was interesting that they had something on paper that they could look at and take away with them. Interestingly, I wasn't expecting this, but confidence. And I guess this is something I hadn't anticipated, was that do people actually know how we individually debrief, and is it their responsibility to learn about that? Whereas actually giving them some clue and some formal structure and ownership let them engage a bit more actively and freely in the discussion. Not all the points were positive, there were some very random ones in the middle. But overall it was worthwhile, and in a small focus group I had afterwards, it really gave me some insight that this rush that we have after a scenario to get the energy and to get the first thoughts isn't best for everybody. Some people will want to take their time and think about what happened and structure their thoughts, and actually just rushing to get that gut reaction, people will just come out with stock phrases because that's all they can do. They haven't had time to think and process what's going on. So in terms of kind of nominal group technique as a tool, some kind of key take-home messages are, I got a lot of information out of this. Yes, people are quite anxious, and there's this whole thing about feedback fatigue and too much paperwork. But in terms of otherwise kind of collecting all this data in a timely manner, recording it, transcribing it, and going through it word by word to work out what's valuable is very hard. Whereas getting the learners to do the work provided it all for me, and it meant that I wasn't putting any of my prejudices or preferences in it going through. It again very helpfully allowed a bit of organisation through the session, and it turned these discussions whereby certain stronger personality types who were maybe at least talking to me in the debrief, I had a way of structuring it, and I made sure I connected to every single person and could see that they had, to some degree, engaged and written down at least one take-home message. And it allowed a lot of diplomacy in a otherwise potentially uncontrollable scenario. And again, it's just been really interesting taking a step away from the norm. And one of my big questions is, we see in a lot of papers that a debrief has happened, but actually to what accountability? How do we increase the reliability and the repeatability of these debriefs if nobody's actually monitoring them or ensuring there's consistency? Because debriefs are messy, personal to that individual group. Whereas this gives us a way to audit that to some degree. I'm not saying it's the answer to everything, but it might be interesting for new learners and people starting out in simulation to get some extra feedback that wouldn't necessarily have to hand. So with that, thank you very much for bearing with me, and I'd love to hear any questions from you.